Death is a very slow process, but no one can say for sure how long it takes. They've never calculated it, simply labelling the day when they stop growing as their oldest age. For them, time is the measurement of change in state, and when growth stops, time also stops. The tallest building on Yenyenli was built a century ago, at which time there was a uniquely long-lived man. Year after year, the crown of his head would bump into the ceilings of the grandest buildings, and so the Yenyenyaites built a pagoda just for him. The area of the pagoda's base was the size of a small park. After he died, as no one else would ever live to be that old, the pagoda was split into 2 stories and turned into a national museum. It is said that the old man left a diary next to every window in the pagoda, recording the vicissitudes of his life. Later on, people climbed up ladders to get the diaries down and read them, but they were passed through so many different hands, they eventually drifted off to who knows where. So people today can only stand beside those yawning empty windows and conjecture as to how a man who could cross a river with a single step went about his daily life. You have been listening to Invisible Planets, a short story selected from the book The Sound of Salt Forming, short stories by the post-80s generation in China, edited by Song Geng and Yang Qingxiang, and published by the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press. The author of the short story, Hao Jingfang, born in 1984 in Tianjin, is a science fiction writer. In 2016, she won the Hugo Award for Best Novelette for her science fiction, Folding Beijing. She works as a macroeconomics researcher at China Development Research Foundation. Tisuati and Luotikawu. Tisuati and Luotikawu make another pair of antonyms. These 2 stars, 100,000 light years apart, are the 2 halves of a big one, opposing one another and shining on one another. The bodies of Tishuashans are smaller than the bodies of the residents of many other planets. Their skin is uniquely soft, and their bodies rapidly change form. This Lamarckian planet has developed genetic expression to an extreme, exceeding limits and compressing species variation into the short life of a single individual. Tishuashans can change at will. Those who practicing rock climbing will grow longer and longer arms, until their arms are even longer than the body. Machine operators can grow 6 arms, and a single worker is able to operate many different valve switches at the same time. People on the streets all look vastly different from one another. Anywhere you go, you can see mouths that take up half the face, slim waists that sway like noodles in the wind, and bodies covered from head to toe in hemispheres of layered keratin armor. These kinds of changes take place their entire lives. No one can tell from appearance who their parents are, and after enough time has passed, one's parents have a hard time picking their own child out from the crowd. It's just that saying at will isn't quite accurate, and not all Tishuashans can take on the form they choose. Often, they are still rather unclear in their own thinking, and they accidentally take a long step, or bump into someone, and suddenly feel their legs growing 3 times longer, or little spines sprouting out of their backs. A few years later, they will have become skilled warriors, standing on a pair of legs that can ascend a 2-story building in 1 step, their entire bodies covered in rigid spikes. Because of this, most Tishuashans are much more cautious than people from other planets. They speak and act in careful circumspection, worried that one careless moment will change a grimace that they might make before bed into a face full of fearsome fangs the next morning, which will soon turn into a tumour with no hope of removal from then on out. On the crowded streets of Tisuati, you can see everyone's life and work at a single glance. And unfortunately, this is the only commonality shared with Luotikawu. On Luotikawu, people's appearances also vary greatly. There are runners, singers, foundry workers, thinkers, and so many other types, and the differences in various types of people can be seen clearly in the musculature, body type, height, and sense organs. The situation is very similar to that on Tisuati. However, on Luotikawu, The course of life is completely different from that on Tisawati. This is a Darwinist planet, top to bottom opposed to any efforts related to the Lamarckian theory of use and disuse. On Lotikabu, the rate of genetic mutation is very small, and change and differentiation based on random change and natural selection occur very slowly. Thus, because of a particular form of asexual reproduction, the cellular mutations of individual Lotikabuians can be expressed through inheritance. Those cells changing in the body generation after generation pass on their own life-serving convictions to the next individual without reservation, and thus the changes of the parents are continuously passed on to the sons and daughters. Thus, the sons of ironsmiths are naturally stronger than others, and watchmakers' daughters are endowed with a superior vision and dexterous fingers from birth. After thousands of years of accumulation, this differentiation eventually evolves into differentiation that cannot be interbred, and every vocation becomes its own separate species. Some have even gone extinct. The fittest species continue to persevere and thrive. What holds together all of these different sentient species is language. It is only a common language and a common number of chromosomes that allow them to recognize their shared ancestral roots. Aside from this, they have nothing in common. No one envies another's work, just as a monkey doesn't envy a dinosaur. Birds have the heaven and fish have the ocean. They brush past one another in the same city, and they have seen the other, but they haven't really seen anything at all. Tissuatians have carried out the process of evolution 10 million times over, but they've distanced themselves from true progress. Their embryos remain the same, plump and round, still in their original form. And Lotikawu individuals happen to be just the opposite. Not one of them can feel differentiation or evolution, but in the great changes over months and years that turn mulberry fields into seas, they draw a series of winding lines. You're lying! You pout. How can there be two completely opposite systems in the same universe? How can't there, my lovely little princess? Nothing is impossible. A handful of small unintentional paces strung together become a system. Maybe now you smile a bit or crease your brow. In the future, these will have two different outcomes and will become two different systems. But now, how can you know this? Is that how it is, you ask, as you thoughtfully tilt your head, not speaking for some time? Looking at your face, I smile softly. The swing you are sitting on sways gently, creating a subtle breeze that blows the wisps of hair at your temples back and forth. Actually, the answer to the question is the manner of reproduction. It's just that this answer is too dull, and I don't want to tell you. You know, the real key doesn't lie in whether I'm telling the truth or not, it lies in whether or not you believe. From beginning to end, the conductor of the stories is not the mouth, but the ears. You have been listening to Invisible Planets, a short story selected from the book The Sound of Salt Forming, short stories by the post-80s generation in China, edited by Song Gong and Yang Qingxiang, and published by the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press. The author of the short story, Hao Jingfeng, born in 1984 in Tianjin, is a science fiction writer. In 2016, she won the Hugo Award for Best Novelette for her science fiction, Folding Beijing. She works as a macroeconomics researcher at China Development Research Foundation. Tinkatwa. Only on Tinkatwa do the mouth and ears achieve their greatest existential significance. For Tinkatwaites, speech is not a way of passing time, it is a necessity of life. Nothing on Tinkatwa is particularly special, other than its thick atmosphere, which is impenetrable to light. The planet's surface is a sheath of darkness. Life on the sultry, dense surface of Tinkatwa is born in the organic tidal floods, gathered energy from magma flows, and lives on without end in the subterranean heat of volcanic fire. To the Tinkatwaites, burbling calderas of the sun, the dwelling place of the gods, and the source of energy and knowledge. Outside of the mouths of the volcanoes, they can find the eternally regenerating Cheaptoyman candy, which is what they eat, their life source. Tincatoites have never had light-sensing organs. They have no eyes. They use sound to find one another, and their ears can not only hear, but they can also observe. Of course, speaking more precisely, they don't actually have ears. Instead, they use their bodies to feel everything. Their entire upper body is covered with ladder-shaped membranes, each sheet of which is covered in thousands of fibers of varying length that resonate with different sonic frequencies. The phase difference noted by each membrane will then be processed by the brain to determine the location of the sound's source. Not only does it calculate distance, but it can also determine the shape of the object. Because of this, Tincatoites speak ceaselessly every single day, and ceaselessly listen to the speech of others. They emit sound to sense the existence of others and to make their existence known to them. They cannot be silent. If they are silent, they are in danger. Silence makes them afraid. Only by constantly speaking are they able to confirm their location for others, to confirm they are still alive. They strive to speak loudly because this will make them more apparent, easier to be sensed by others. Sometimes children are born with damage to their voice boxes, and it seems that because of this, they are unable to survive. A single careless moment and they'll be knocked to the ground by some big person charging about, and other people won't even know that there was such a child. That's too tragic. Why do your stories get shorter and shorter, each one more tragic than the last? Tragic? Is it that the stories I tell are tragic, or are the stories you hear tragic? Is there a difference? Well, of course there is. I've also been to another planet. The people there can produce 10,000 different frequencies of sound, but they can only hear a small fraction of them. The sensitivity of their ears can't keep up with the vibrations of their throats, so people are always hearing less than what they are saying. What's most interesting of all is that the frequencies that people sense are all slightly different. So while they all think they're hearing the same song, 1,000 people are actually hearing 1,000 different songs, but no one knows it. You're teasing me. Where could a place like that be? You bite your lip, eyes as wide as saucers. I'm getting suspicious. Have you really been to those planets? You just made them up to make me happy, didn't you? My beloved princess, starting with Othello, every knight has used tales of far-flung wonder to move the lady of his heart. Can you tell which are true and which are false? In my travels to these planets, I'm like Marco Polo, and the cities he visited, just like Kublai Khan and the far-flung lands beneath his blade, switching in the blink of an eye. You might say I've really been there, and you might say I've never left. The planets I speak of are scattered about every corner of the universe, but there are also times when they suddenly gather together, and it's as if they were all united all along. Hearing this, you giggle. I get it. They are all gathered in your stories, and now you've told the stories to me, and they're gathered in my mind, right? I look at you and smile softly. Sigh quietly to myself, a sound that is enough to bring calm, and you can't extract any clues from my smile. What can I say? And how can I tell you? Stories can't gather anything at all if they are doomed to separation. Yes, I say quietly, we've sat here and told stories for a whole afternoon. We've had a whole universe. It's just that this story isn't the only one I told you. On this afternoon, you and I are both storytellers and audience. You have been listening to Invisible Planets, a short story selected from the book The Sound of Salt Forming, short stories by the post-80s generation in China, edited by Song Gang and Yang Qingxiang, and published by the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press. The author of the short story, Hao Jingfang, born in 1984 in Tianjin, is a science fiction writer. In 2016, she won the Hugo Award for Best Novelette for her science fiction, Folding Beijing. She works as a macroeconomics researcher at China Development Research Foundation. Tianjin. Tianjin is the last planet I'll be telling you about today. The story is very short. It will be told in an instant. Jinjalinians are shaped differently from the denizens of any of the other planets I've told you about. Their bodies are like soft balloons, or like jellyfish floating around in the air, diaphanous and malleable. The surfaces of Jinjalinians' bodies are composed of cell membranes that are almost liquid. They aren't completely permeable, but if they come into contact with one another, they can merge and then separate again. When two Jinjalinians come into contact with one another, parts of their bodies briefly merge, and the substances inside mix together before the two bodies separate once again. So Jinjalinians are not all that concerned about their own limbs. They themselves can't really say what portion of their bodies has come from people they've come into contact with. They figure that as long as they are still themselves, trading some substance doesn't matter. However, they don't really know that in fact the preservation of self is really just an illusion. In that moment of merging, the original two individuals no longer exist. They become a complex, and then separate into two new individuals. The new individuals are unaware of what came before their union. They just think they are themselves, and that nothing has changed. Do you know, after telling you these stories, after you've heard me tell these stories, I am no longer me, and you are no longer you. On this warm afternoon, in this merging of time, from now on, ourselves both have some of the other in them, even if we forget all about this conversation. You're saying that your story of Jinjalin is really our planet? Our planet? Which one do you mean? Which planet ever belonged to us? Or which planet do we belong to? And don't ask me for the coordinates of those planets. Those digits are the oldest proverbs of the universe. They are the empty space between your fingers. You can reach out your hand and take hold of them, but when you open it up again, it will be absolutely empty. You and I have met with them at the same point in space-time and then drifted apart again. In the end, we are just travellers, singing nebulous songs, wandering about the pitch-black sky, and that is all. You know that they sing in the wind, in a far-off homeland. They sing in the wind.
What you just heard was the final part of the story, titled Invisible Planets, from the book The Sound of Salt Forming, Short Stories by the Post-80s Generation in China, published by the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press in 2016. Invisible Planets features a range of unique planets with their distinctive residents. One of the planets in the story has a beautiful landscape with happy people habitually telling lies. Meanwhile, another planet has inhabitants who appear open to all sorts of new ideas, but never really accept any. At the same time, yet another planet is ruled by two species that depend on each other, but never get to know about each other's existence. The story is full of insight, imagination, and metaphors of human society. Join us again next time on A Light on Literature for the next story, titled Roughcast Couple. I'm Huang Rui. See you next time.
You have been listening to Invisible Planets, a short story selected from the book The Sound of Salt Forming. Short stories by the post-80s generation in China, edited by Song Dong and Yang Jingxiang, and published by the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press. The author of the short story, Hao Jingfeng, born in 1984 in Tianjin, is a science fiction writer. In 2016, she won the Hugo Award for Best Novelette for her science fiction, Folding Beijing. She works as a macroeconomics researcher at China Development Research Foundation.
From epic tales of mystery and magic to accounts of battle and empire, from the verses of ancient poets
关关雎鸠，在河
to the masterpieces of our times. A light on literature brings to life China's literary heritage and a look at the world in a new light.
What are folks talking about in the most populous country in the world? What is it really like living in China? What does that have to do with you and the rest of the globe? Grab a seat at the round table and find out what's cracking from the hottest English discussion show coming straight out of China. Find us at Round Table China on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you there.
Put down that lengthy book spanning thousands of years and instead follow the Makers and Shakers of Chinese History podcast, which presents the biographies of 20 historic figures who shaped the course of ancient China. Meet the most renowned ancient Chinese rulers, ministers, thinkers, scientists, poets, and rebels, and find out how they continue to influence the Chinese to this day. Subscribe to Makers and Shakers of Chinese History for free on your favorite podcast.
Want to learn about world affairs in a more laid-back and accessible manner? Join insiders, experts, and analysts in the casual setting of the chat lounge to hear their personal experiences and opinions on major events and hot issues. Subscribe to Chat Lounge for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Ever wondered what's actually going on in Africa through the perspective of really going between China and Africa? What's the narrative of this relationship? Well, get a perspective with China-Africa Talk. Hear from African diplomats, entrepreneurs, academics, Chinese natives, and more. Get on our wavelength every week to find out what's real with China-Africa Talk. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. We'll see you there.
From north to south, east to west, people in China are chasing their dreams and leaving their mark. Want to know how they beat the odds and made a difference? Footprints brings you the true life stories of their journeys. Experience the musical classics of the East. Mingle with the masters of Chinese music.
我的这种美召唤了女性。
Music talks. Witness the sound of antiquity and modernity.
Cutting through an overload of information to get to the heart of the story. Pass to the point.
COVID cases in the United States are on the rise again, with the 7-day moving average reaching 100,000 cases. The White House has stressed the need for additional funding to combat COVID-19 and has been warning about the consequences of not getting it. What is pushing the latest wave? How dire is the situation? And given the U.S. has just announced $40 billion in new aid to Ukraine, is fighting COVID-19 a priority for the U.S. government or not? Welcome to The Point with me, Li Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Connecticut, the United States, by Professor Stan Vermund, Dean of the Yale School of Public Health, and from Washington by Dr. Alice Hyung-Kyung Tan, internist at Ms. Medi Women's Hospital. Welcome to both of you to The Point. So, Professor Vermund, let me go to you first. As we know that there have been a total of 83 million number of infections in the United States of COVID, over 1 million deaths. And as I said, the U.S. is observing a trend where daily infections are on the rise again. According to the CDC, the 7-day average cases are have reached 100,000. Why is the number rising now? And given the fact that some are saying that the actual number of cases could be as high as there are cases that are not reported to the central authority, is that reflecting the reality?
These are excellent questions. We are only managing about 35% of the American population to have gotten boosted. And we know that there is some waning of the initial 2 doses of vaccine over a 4 to 6 month period. But we've not been successful in raising the proportion of boosted people to the level of overall vaccination. So there are people who are more vulnerable because their immunization status is not optimized. And we still have in the neighborhood of 20% of Americans who are refusing vaccination altogether. Given the Omicron variants that seem to be more infectious, this then gives an opportunity for these viruses to spread. You mentioned about also about home testing, and certainly you're right that some of the milder cases are not being reported.
Specifically, let me stay with you. As you mentioned, the vaccination rate in the United States, we know that 580 million doses have been administered in the United States. 78% of the population have gotten their first shot, 67% their second shot, and only 30% of the total population have gotten their booster shot, just to reinforce what you have just said there. But according to your understanding, specifically, are people getting repeated infections because their previous immunity has waned, or are these new infections, meaning people who are getting COVID for the very first time, the latest wave we are seeing?
It's a mixed bag. There are persons who have been vaccinated and they get infected, but their disease tends to be mild. There are people who had prior COVID and are now getting COVID again. They also have a milder disease because they have partial protection from their previous infection. However, there are people getting COVID for the very first time, and if they're not vaccinated, that represents a subset of the hospitalized patients and some of the deaths, a substantial proportion of the deaths. So it's quite a mix now of who's getting COVID. But to be honest, it's the people getting hospitalized, the people who are dying, who are of greatest concern. And we are deeply sorry that many of them have refused vaccination.
You mentioned the number of deaths. We also have the latest numbers according to the CDC. However, that it seems the daily average number of deaths is not that high compared to the number of infections. For instance, right now we're seeing a 7-day average of about 300 on a daily basis. It's still extremely sad and extremely unfortunate, but it seems that it's not as significant as the wave of infections that we're seeing. Dr. Tan, you are mostly in the Republic of Korea. I understand you're right now in the United States. What is your observation as to how dire this latest surge is, considering the relatively moderate number of deaths we're seeing?
Well, as you know, COVID deaths are a lagging indicator. And what is obvious is when we look at the epidemic curve from Johns Hopkins University, it's from the 3rd week of May. The number of COVID deaths, new COVID deaths, that also started to increase. What is more obvious is we are also seeing an increase in hospitalizations, new hospitalizations due to COVID-19. And that's very obvious. And so it may just be a matter of time until, of course, the deaths catch up and we start to see a more obvious increase in deaths. What's concerning is, even though we did mention the mixed bag in terms of what we're seeing, we are seeing hospitalizations among mostly people who are unvaccinated, but we're also noticing a higher proportion of COVID deaths that are occurring in people who have actually been vaccinated. And this is very concerning indeed. And it's not simply a reflection of more people having been vaccinated, the protective effect of our vaccines may be waning as well. And so this is something we really need to keep an eye on in terms of the breakthrough infections that are happening. And unfortunately, when we look at the curve, it's moving in the wrong direction. All three: new cases, new hospitalizations, and new deaths.
According to your observation, Dr. Tan, and in comparison with what you're seeing in your home country, how rigorous are the measures taken by the U.S. administration in terms of helping people fight this virus? Is it trying to fight as much as it can, or have the authorities and the general public adopted a kind of laissez-faire attitude because they basically have not been able to ward off this virus, so it's a de facto let it rip that you're observing there?
Well, certainly the approach taken in the United States, I think, is very different from what was taken in South Korea. Here, public health measures tend to lag, I think. Rather than being proactive, they're reactive. And so here, where I am, King County of Washington State, right now the COVID community level is medium. We're on the verge of being high. And that is, of course, the highest level of community alert. And once you reach high, that's when they will start to think about reinstating indoor mask mandates and so forth. And by that time, of course, it's too late. A lot of the preventable cases, preventable hospitalizations, and preventable deaths, that opportunity to prevent them has been lost because of the lag in the implementing more stringent public health measures. So that is one difference that I've noticed in the two countries as I've traveled back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Professor Vermont, what is your comment to Dr. Tan's observation of the kind of lack of proactive attitude and action and policy by either the local or the federal administration in tackling this? Has COVID infection become a fact of life and a matter of time for everyone in the U.S. to be infected at least once?
We do have a paradox, which is that cases are rising, hospitalizations are rising less dramatically, and deaths are actually quite stable and comparatively low. We've never seen that before. And I think the reason for this is we are having fewer deaths and fewer hospitalizations than the case numbers would indicate because of the vaccine status. Many people are vaccinated and immunized, and many people have gotten COVID and therefore have partial protection. So I think there's a sense in the country that it's less concern because there are fewer deaths than would be expected with this number of cases. Also, many of the cases are less severe than they used to be, which is why the hospital rise is not commensurate with at the same steep level as the case rise. So I do think that there is a sense of confidence that the worst is behind us. And of course, we are seeing.
Does that alarm you, Professor Vermont, the sense that the worst is behind you? Because the cases, the number of deaths could pick up, and you are seeing wave after wave of infection despite people. We are already in the third year of this pandemic.
Well, there's no question the worst is behind us. The death rates are much lower than they used to be. So I don't think I dispute that. But the case rates are still quite high, and as you observed, they're rising. So I do think that people need to be taking more precautions and be more aware of ongoing COVID transmission. We hope that the summertime, with more outdoor activity and less indoor action, will be helpful. But in the hotter parts of our country, people are paradoxically indoors more during the summer because they want the air conditioning, and that could increase risk. So I do think there's risk in this country, and people need to be cautious.
Dr. Tan, what is your assessment? Do you think the worst is over already? I mean, we're also talking about the aftermath, the post-COVID symptom, where some media have published articles comparing to the pandemic after the pandemic, not to mention the kind of lack or erosion in productivity as a result of symptoms such as long COVID.
So I think you're bringing up a very good point. I would disagree with my co-panelists. I don't think there is a guarantee that the worst is behind us. There is no guarantee that we will not encounter another variant that is a variant of high consequence, not just a variant of concern, a variant that not only evades immunity, but could also we could run into the problem of resistance to our only two really oral antiviral medications. So I really don't see any guarantee that the pandemic is over, and so I don't think it makes sense to act as if the pandemic were over. And your point about long COVID, I think is excellent, and it really deserves more attention because we could be faced with really a tidal wave of new cases of stroke, heart disease, blood clots, anxiety, depression, so many diseases, diabetes, so many diseases that could be the long legacy of this pandemic. And so governments really need to prepare for a deluge of potential cases due to what the pandemic has done in the present day. The legacy may last for decades.
Professor Vermont, your reactions?
I share Dr. Tan's concerns, and I think she makes excellent points. We are in much better situation today than we were 2 years ago, because if a new variant that escaped the immune protection of current vaccines were to emerge, we have the technologies to develop a new vaccine against that new variant, and that could be done very quickly. We also have that same ability to design biological therapies such as monoclonal antibodies against new strains. So this is a new technological ability that we have that we didn't have 2 years ago. So I'm not quite as alarmed by an emerging new strain. It will cost a lot of money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So I don't want to trivialize it at all, but I don't think that we are going to see the degree of death from COVID in our country that we've seen over the past 2 years. I believe that we can mitigate disease as it emerges subsequently. None of that's an excuse to be excessively casual, and I do think that we need to maintain an intelligent strategy for public health measures to prevent disease. I'm a public health guy. I don't want to see people have to have therapeutic interventions. I would rather prevent their exposure and mitigate the seriousness with vaccines.
Professor Vermont, you talked about a lot of options, a lot of possibilities, a lot of availabilities, such as the technologies that are there. But it will take time, for instance, when you use that technology to turn into something that can prevent people from getting infected, for instance, by a new variant of COVID-19. And as I mentioned in the lead-in, for instance, the White House made the request for $22.5 billion additional fund to fight COVID, and they've yet to get it. It seems at the moment that it's not the priority, as the Ukraine crisis is getting immediately a lot of funding compared to the domestic public health crisis. How do you react to that? Do you think enough is being done by the Biden administration to prioritize the fight against COVID-19?
Well, I don't think the problem is with the administration. They have asked for this support, and they have lobbied for it, but Congress has not been supportive. So I think the Biden administration and the COVID response headed by Dr. Ashish Jha has been very articulate about the need for these resources. Congress hasn't been convinced, And this is partly because COVID has bizarrely become a partisan issue in our country, where typically Republicans and Democrats are both keen to support public health measures, clean water and drinking water and proper sewage disposal. These are not partisan issues, but somehow COVID and COVID vaccine has become partisan. I blame the previous president for this. I think he could have done much more to advocate for COVID vaccines, for example, and he could have set a much better example in terms of public health measures to prevent transmission. But he didn't. He sent very many mixed messages and even hostile messages to COVID control. And many people support the former president, Trump, so I think this has twisted people's judgment as to what the importance is of this disease.
Well, regardless of which party you belong to, Dr. Tan, the mere fact that the Congress is not convinced that COVID is an extremely serious measure, that you have the relative high level of immunity, not mostly from vaccination, but from people getting this disease, from people getting sick. And now the number of people who are getting sick is on the rise. What does that say about what has to be told? What kind of alarm clock, alarming messages or facts and numbers that have to go out there to convince people in the United States that the price of what the U.S. is living with now is already high enough and more needs to be done?
Right, we can't gamble with the pandemic anymore. We have scientific evidence that shows that the sera of patients who have had COVID before without vaccination, in terms of its neutralizing activity against new subvariants, the BA.4, BA.5, BA.2, 1.2.1, the neutralizing activity of people who have had prior infection is not as high as people who have been vaccinated or people who were wise enough to get vaccinated after a prior infection. So if we have a large pool of people in America who think that they are protected enough just because they had prior infection, that's simply not the case. And as I said, we can't afford to gamble with this pandemic. 1 million lives have been lost. This is as of May 16th, this last Monday. I don't know what other number needs to be put out there to convince Congress to have the political will to fund all of the fight that we need to sustain our measures, our countermeasures against the pandemic. We need funding to purchase vaccines. We need funding for manufacturing of test kits to sustain the labs to do the testing, to do the genetic surveillance that's needed. And we need more research. We need second-generation vaccines that offer broader protection against more variants, more durable protection. We need vaccines that work on the mucosa in the nose so that we don't have transmission going on. There's so many things that we still need to do, and if we simply don't have the funding, it will all stop. And this is just setting our country up for more preventable deaths, more tragedy, and on a global scale, it could be very destabilizing.
Professor Lamont, on the contrary, we're seeing, for instance, on the Chinese social media, scenes of large-scale gatherings, thousands of young people gathered without any social distancing, without masks, celebrating, for instance, a graduation ceremony, and you have the impression that everything is fine, that the COVID is not there. There is not a virus that's spreading. How come? Is it two Americas we're seeing? One that is suffering with the virus and the other, life is already returning to normal?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Tan that we are being much too casual about the ongoing threat of the virus. And I think that some of these large gatherings requiring full vaccination status and boosting, and thereby risks are not as severe in that kind of ecosystem. But many other gatherings are not looking at vaccine status at all. There are many susceptible people many people whose immunity has waned from vaccination over a year ago or infection over a year ago. So I do think that these risk so-called super spreader events, and many people can get infected at such gatherings. So judicious use of masks, limiting the size of gatherings, ensuring that if you have a gathering that persons are vaccinated or that they are tested the day of or the day previous to the gathering, and everyone tests COVID negative. All of these things are available tools for us to control transmission. At my university, we have our graduation tomorrow. We're going to have 10,000 people in one location, but they will all have been vaccinated. Nearly all of them will have been boosted, and I think that we can keep people safe.
Finally, Professor Vermont, because you mentioned that the worst is over, and yet we are seeing, for instance, warning from the Biden administration that actually the United States could see 100 million coronavirus infections more than the current level, and that a potentially significant wave of deaths this fall and this winter. How do you look at this prospect?
I think it's essential that we substantially improve our booster rate of vaccine. It's really disturbing that it's only 35%. And we really need to get as close to full boosted capacity as we can get. That will help a lot. And I think at least we know that if rates do climb, we are in a position to reinstate some of the limitations, including mandatory mask use and physical distancing. Some of the strategies that were reasonably successful in helping us in the latter part of 2020 and much of 2021. So I do think we're in a position to reinstate some of these limitations if we see rates rising. And as Dr. Tan pointed out, if we have new variants, we may need new vaccines.
Okay. Well, we'll keep a close watch on the situation because, as we have observed, the rate of vaccination has actually plateaued since February. I mean, the percentage of the population gotten boosted have actually stayed very much the same. And now that you have relaxed some of these mandates, how easy it is to reimpose these restrictive measures that people just don't like by nature. Anyway, many thanks to Professor Stan Vermont, Dean of the Yale School of Public Health, and Dr. Alice Hyung-Kyung-Tan, internist at Miss Medi Women's Hospital. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Lucian, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Lucian in Beijing. Go to YouTube and look for 2 p.m. The Point.